right, good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us today for the webinar, The Digital Transformation. I'm going to start just with a few housekeeping items here. First, you are all muted just for call quality purposes, but we do want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A pane that should be available at the bottom of your screen. And you can also put comments or any input that you have into the chat pane as well. Also, we will be sending the slides out after this presentation, so don't feel like you need to take a ton of notes or anything. We'll have them available to you right afterwards. So with that, I'm going to introduce our presenters. So we have Mike Murphy. Mike has an extensive background in engineering, sales, and marketing, so he is a great person to advise our clients and give this presentation as well. We also have Alan Beck. Alan has been with Acadia for quite some time as well and has lots of experience with lead generation and is also a great advisor for our clients. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Mike to get us started.
Thank you, Bridget. And we're going to stop the video as well, just to, again, for the quality purposes and open up some bandwidth. So thank you everybody for joining today. And I'd like to start out with basically just kind of, it's maybe an unpleasant reminder of where we are, but it actually sets the stage for kind of where we're going. So this is everybody's life today. This picture is reflective of our daily lives. This is morning team meetings, family get-togethers. This is our team, and this has been our reality since mid-March. Our world has drastically changed. I mean, our paradigm, our day-to-day lives have been turned upside down. And I'm sure for many of you, it's been completely foreign and you've had to get used to it. But somehow I think we've all begun to settle in and it's becoming less strange. It's maybe not the way we do want it, but it certainly is forcing us to think differently, interact differently, and do business differently. With respect to sales and marketing, we have all become virtual salespeople and marketers. There's no trade shows, there's no networking meetings, conferences, and limited personal sales interface. Yet somehow we're figuring it out. I hate the new normal, the term new normal, but to put it bluntly, we're here. So, Alan, I'm going to actually pass it off to you here and talk a little bit about where we are and where we're going, and it's off to you there, Alan.
As Mike said, it is a horrible situation that we're finding ourselves in, but the COVID-19 effect has accelerated our journey into really what had been an inevitable future. Whether we were ready for it or not, we find ourselves in it. It's forcing us to do things differently, but at the same time, it's brought us to the point where, like I said, we were eventually going to get here, and now that we are, we can learn from it and adapt to it. Acadia provides lead generation services for industrial companies and is also a certified Thomas partner. So we do see this every day. During a recent virtual Thomas regional sales meeting, Tony Uphoff, who is the president and CEO of Thomas for Industry, he very succinctly stated, "The digital transformation is here, and the current health crisis has accelerated the arrival. It is here for good and is irrevocable. We are not going back to the way things were." So moving forward, if you haven't already begun to optimize your business development digitally, now is the time. We'll walk through the buyer's journey, what that means to you, and how to best address finding new opportunities for your business. So the paradigm change that we are being forced to get into is how to think about our businesses in a different way and reevaluate how we are going to be handling this moving forward. Such questions as, do we really need as much brick and mortar? Can some of our employees continue to work virtually as we move forward? Do I deploy automation in my plants for efficiency, but also, bringing in some social distancing? How do I make sales calls, network, and secure new clients today? How can I optimize the new tools that I'm finding myself using that I now have in place, such as video conferencing, collaboration sites, and many other tools? How can I use these to make my business run better and lower the cost? These are just a sample of the type of questions that we're hearing as we speak to people in the industry, and we've been hearing this over the past few weeks. Everyone's goal is the same. We hopefully want to come out of this crisis with a clear plan that will ultimately make all of our companies stronger. We understand that there are companies which are struggling right now, but we're finding that many of those companies are taking this time to educate themselves and optimize their internal systems. So I just want to stop and say, please share in the chat pane or the Q&A pane, what questions are you facing in your business? We would love to know how what you're coming up against, especially as it relates to any of your sales and marketing. If there's some new some new normal thing that you're not handling well, and you'd like to share some of your frustrations or the questions you're having, please do so at this time. But as we move forward, you'll still have that opportunity. But I do want to share kind of the rough agenda that we have in place here. We're going to talk about beginning with the challenge. Where are the buyers? How do we find them with the world we are now in? Some key metrics that we can look at that are driving and impacting the buying process. The journey, how buyers buy today and now into tomorrow as things are evolving. And the journey, it really doesn't end with the sale. And so if that is if that's something that you haven't considered, the continual relationship building with people after the sale, that's for you. Then what's next? Where are you today? Where do you ideally want to go, and where do you want to be? And after that, we will end with some Q&A. So at this point in time, Mike, why don't you take that first bullet point there, the challenge.
Very good. Thank you, Alan. And, the question at hand, and I think we all deal with it every day, is why is it harder to find, track, identify, and engage your buyers than ever before? I'd like to, again, restate that this transformation, has been happening, but it's just arrived faster. And it's forcing us to put things in place to address it. So I'd like to walk through a few of those things and maybe, get you in a different mindset, or maybe just reinforce the mindset that you are already in. So, it's where are the buyers and how are they finding you? Or conversely, how are you finding them? Every business has a limited market, and it's defined by its applications, right? Its products or services, industry type, maybe automotive, aerospace, material handling. It could be tied to geography, firmographics such as employee size and company size and count. Taking into account, though, your overall market is a much smaller subset of, let's say, manufacturing, right? So you have the big overall market, and then you have your target markets within that. And of that subset, a very small percentage are actually in buying mode. How many times have we been lucky enough to pick up the phone, make a phone call, or send an email and somebody goes, hey, I need to buy something now? That like almost never happens. I mean, that's not the reality of the way things are today, and it's getting more challenging. Bringing that buying prospect and other prospects that may be in consideration mode along to meet your goals and your sales goals is the trick that we need to manage. And again, with today's environment and digital environment, things have definitely changed for us. So what I'd like to talk about is this graphic. It's by someone called Jeremy. You can look him up, Jeremy Miller of Sticky Branding. I've seen different variations of similar themes, and I still think this is very representative of the dynamics of the market. So if you take a look, you'll see that only about on that very top of that pyramid, about 3% of the market is in buying mode at any given time. You also have to keep in mind that today, the prospect controls the sales process. We are no longer, as salespeople, in control of the early part of the sales process. The buyer is. You've heard that before, but it bears worth repeating. But the 3% rule, as Jeremy Miller states it, is broken out into 5 buying segments. And I'll just briefly talk about each one of those. So that top 3% are those, I'm going to buy now. These are the people and the companies that have a need and are actively shopping. They want to make a purchase in the next 30 to 90 days. And you would consider these sales qualified, sales ready leads. Obviously, that's the golden nugget that we're all after. Then the next 7% or so of the top of that pyramid intend to change at some point in time. These are prospects that actually have a need, but aren't yet proactively searching for options. For example, a well-timed cold call or a marketing campaign that hits their inbox can be very effective on this segment because they are receptive to new ideas. So you might consider these marketing qualified leads, people who are just beginning to realize that the need is there and maybe they should start to act upon it. And it's kind of up to us to say, hey, you have the need, and let us help you recognize it. Then the next is the 30%. They have a need, but not enough to act. The way I like to look at it is, everyone here, I'm sure, has seen Star Wars and Admiral Akbar when he yells, "It's a trap." Well, these are the people are the trap. This group is actually not buying. They may look and act like prospects, but they won't make a commitment. They have other priorities. Until the need becomes more pressing, they won't make a purchase. How many times you as salespeople or marketers have engaged with this group of people only to be disappointed at the end? I kind of like to think of this group as the hopium group. They draw you in, they engage you in the sales process, drag you along, and you hope they're going to buy. Ultimately, they don't. It's important to develop a lead qualification criteria for this group because they can really spend a lot of time wasting your time. I had a colleague that once said to me, to win big, lose early. It's still a lesson I'm learning every day. I think we all get caught up in sometimes the enthusiasm of the conversation and so on. But it's hard not to get caught up in it, but try not to get tied into non-fruitful engagements and focus on those good ones, those top 10%. Then there's the 30% that don't have a need. All right, this segment of the market has no need for your products or services, not really receptive to any marketing messages, or they maybe have just made a purchase. They may be too small, but in general, they're not ready for you. And then that final 30% are just not interested. These folks may not fit your products or services. They're never going to choose you. They may be loyal to the competition. Maybe they've had a bad experience with your firm. Who knows? But they may also have different ways of doing things. But, don't sweat it. You can't be everything to everyone. So let's talk a little bit about jobs to be done. All right. So the reason we state this this way is when people have a need and they define a need, it's not they're looking for a specific product. Typically, they're researching the why they need a specific product or what it is in a specific product that meets their application. So this is a very simple little statement here, but it's actually very relevant, is people don't want to buy a quarter-inch drill. They want to drill a quarter-inch hole. So the goal is to make your prospect the center of the situation, the application, the need, make them the hero of the dialogue. Obviously not so much talking about yourself. So when a buyer is in buying mode, you need to be there for them. They begin to research a need, and your message needs to address the job that they're trying to do, not what they're trying to buy or you're trying to sell necessarily. So, your solution needs to be problem-solving based, all right? You need to make, like I said, your prospect the hero of the discussion. So ultimately, let's say that somebody wants to buy a product, let's maybe take it a little layer deeper than the quarter-inch hole. But by the time they've decided to buy a drill bit, they most likely have made the decision to buy from someone already. And again, that decision is being made without you even in the sales engagement. So you've got to provide value. So let's use a more complex example. And let's say I'm looking to buy a product, a form piece of metal. Someone might search, what is the difference between hydroforming and metal stamping? They are two different processes and they do result in a formed part, but they have a need and there's a reason for the reason for re-engineering. They're maybe looking for alternatives behind traditional stampings. Companies that answer this question generally get the opportunity to be part of the dialogue. So let's try to, giving you an example of putting the prospect first. So, based on some of that information, what I'd like to do is then kind of pass Alan the slides back to Alan, talk about maybe some key metrics that as we walk down this journey and eventually talk about the details of the buying process, Alan will talk about some metrics.
Yeah, in addition to the 3% rule that Mike just spoke about, there are other key drivers and influences that we need to keep in mind because they will also affect the buying process. There's always a lot of stats being thrown about regarding this, and I'd like to look at a few that we feel have a big impact on the way buyers are buying. As we look at from a high level, there are three key drivers here that I'd like to focus upon. The first one represented here on the slide is the digital transformation. Now, you've been hearing that term thrown about a lot, especially lately, and it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It covers everything from mobile devices, Industry 4.0, automation, as well as many other areas that we find in our daily lives. If you're involved with marketing regularly, you'll also see how this is affecting your business development. However, if you're not involved with your sales and marketing on a daily basis, you might not equate the digital transformation as much as you would with perhaps technology that you would be placing or be using on your plant floor. However, it is quite the same. Key marketing elements that you should treat almost as maintenance items as you do with your equipment. Your website, SEO, really as a minimum are your ongoing maintenance items for your digital sales and marketing machinery and should be considered in that way. The next thing is skill deficiency in your front office leadership. I don't want you to think that I'm implying that you don't have good people in place that that aren't able to do what you need them to do, but rather there have been such drastic changes in the way that a buyer is doing business, and how they interact with your organization has really changed drastically. Leadership understands that things have changed, but the different diversity of skills that are needed to deploy and run a digital marketing plan typically just do not all exist within one person inside of an organization. Just like it takes many skills to run a production line, today's sales and marketing landscape is very much the same. For instance, you would never think of having your QA inspection function be done by this person that is responsible for procurement and bringing in incoming product, and so forth, or someone who actually working on your production line. In today's marketing landscape, you need designers, content writers, social media experts, SEO and SEM professionals, project management and strategic development. Most small and medium-sized businesses just don't have the ability to hire all these different skill sets, which is why outsourcing is appealing to quite a few of them. And then the last thing, this multi-generational workforce. It really does span the gamut of decision makers. There are those who began their careers before a PC ever existed, and they had to rely upon a road atlas to get around on sales calls, and mobile technology and GPS was science fiction to them. In contrast, today, the generations that are coming, that are here today, they've never known a day really without a mobile device. And most of the technologies we have in the world are just what they've always known. And most importantly, they've pretty much always had any information they've ever needed right at their fingertips. There's digital immigrants and digital natives in the workforce as well. 3 generations all influence the supplier and buyer dynamic. Now let's dive into this a bit deeper in our next slide. So there are 3 generations driving the market, and each of us on this call today represent a different segment. Mike just barely sneaked in there. He is a baby boomer, and that represents 25% of the marketplace. Gen X, like me, we represent 33%. And then millennials, like our host, Bridget, she is representing 40% of the workplace, with the balance of those percentages, taking up with the greatest generation. Now, there are 3 stats we need to keep in mind when we look at these different generations involved. Millennials, as I mentioned, are now 40% of the workforce, and that is just going to continue to grow. 73% of these millennial workers are now being involved in decisions to purchase products or services for their companies. They're taking procurement and purchasing roles in companies. And then 84% of engineers, they consume the content online. So they are just used to having that information ready and handy for them, and they go online to find that. So we serve the industrial space, and that last bullet is really very compelling. They 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 aren't delivering information through the preferred channels. I'm sorry, if you aren't delivering that information through the channels that they're using to learn about your products, your services, and your technology, you are missing opportunities, and it's hard to measure the cost of a lost opportunity. The key to answer the prospects is to search with them in mind. Now, with that in thought, I just wanted to be able to give you an idea of how these industrial buyers are, how they're finding you and what they're paying attention to. So when Thomas for Industry surveyed their industrial buying audience, the following areas were where industrial buyers paid the most attention. And not surprisingly, 73% said the website was where they were finding a lot of this information. They were also learning about companies through their market presence. 61% brand strength and reputation, and then we dropped down to 24% through case studies, and then 10% through social media. Not surprisingly, your website, as I said, was number one. This is likely not a surprise to anyone here on the call. It also represents the highest area of opportunity for most businesses, as a website is often a secondary thought. It should be considered your number one salesperson, and we often ask our prospects, how much does your website drive new leads to your business? An answer we commonly hear back, repeated back to us, is that their website is there just to have something to send people to, or it's there to provide credibility to the company. It's not thought of as a lead driver. The other answer we often hear is, I don't get anything from our website. Both statements point to areas of opportunity for your business. Improvement in this area, knowing that so much so much attention is paid to it, it really can pay off great dividends. Items such as market presence, which means just being where the buyer is looking. Brand reputation and case studies are all about the client evaluation stages in the buyer's journey. All of those stages, not surprisingly, take place online. So just want to focus on one more thing for you to consider as we're going along, and put your thoughts in the QA area, is, do you feel your website is generating leads for you? As I mentioned, this is an area that has a lot of opportunity for you to take advantage of, and if you're not utilizing it to its best, those are opportunities that are potentially being lost for you. So just put in the chat pane if there is if you have any thoughts about how that process is working for you. Now, this next slide, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but just the biggest takeaway that I want you to have from this is that mobile use has surpassed desktop use. It is very important that your mobile presence is taken into consideration when you are thinking of your website and promoting your company. So the reason why all of this is important is because it comes down to how buyers buy. We've talked about how the engineers use online resources. This is an example of why that is so true. You've heard a lot of variations of this theme, but it does hold true for manufacturing and industrial space. 70% of the buyer's journey is completed before the buyer ever picks up the phone and talks to anyone in your sales organization. They're fully defining their needs on their own before they engage with anybody. And 44% of them actually already identify the solution before they reach out. They already know who it is they want to, who they want to do business with. And you have no input in that other than what you can provide to them online when they're trying to find this information. So Mike's going to go on to our next bullet point about, how these buyers are buying.
All right, thank you, Alan. So let's take a look at this industrial buying process. It holds true whether it's an engineer, procurement professional, or an end user and plant maintenance manager, or a small to medium sized or large company, or that's non-industry specific. The buying process is the same. So, as noted earlier, 70% of the buying process is done online. And we said 44% of the buyers identify a solution they want even before they speak to a salesperson. So you have to keep that in mind when you are performing your digital programs and thinking about what areas people go to consume the content and the information that they are looking for during the buying process. Just take a quick look, and I won't walk through it in detail. You can do so after the webinar when you get the slides. But the top graphic represents, the top side of the graphic represents what's important to the buyer, the things the buyer is looking for or are doing during their buying process. And then underneath the graphic is what's important to the product or service provider. In other words, the things that you are trying to do during those aligned stages with the buying process. So I'd like to talk about the first two stages. We'll start in the beginning. You'll see a box around the need and research areas, and you'll see things noted there of the tactics that are relevant in those areas, such as display ads and videos, maybe sponsoring a newsletter. It's an awareness thing, SEO to bring them to your website, ebooks and content to get them to stay on the site, and landing pages where they go to download assets and content that you are providing. So this is the need and research phase. So a buyer does define a need at some point in time. For example, you might be given an engineer and you've been given a task that I need a new lightweight, high strength material for new high performance bicycle frame that you, the designer, have been asked to do. So you need to figure out what the material is. So if you're an engineer tasked with that, you would begin your research phase on how, on how to do it, what to use, what applications it can be used in. So you might search for something such as high strength, lightweight metal for sports equipment potentially. You then might be presented with a blog comparing alloys to aluminum, magnesium, et cetera. Well, that actually did happen when I did this as an example. And what happened is the SEO, the search engine optimization that this particular supplier had, keyed and triggered on those content keywords, and that content drew my search to their site because it was a relevant piece of information that answered the question I was asking. So the key here is education, answering the prospect's questions. So Google search algorithms are all tied to search intent, and that's what you have to remember when you're writing is you have to answer the questions that are being asked in the marketplace. That's a key element to remember. So let's talk about some of the areas that people go to find content and some of the tips and tricks that you can use in your everyday life that might be able to just kind of advance your presence, your brand, and also the way you present information and content. So if you take a look at the stat, 95% of a message is retained when a viewer watches a video versus 10% of what's read. So that's a pretty compelling piece of information. If you're not engaging video, you should be engaging video. You don't have to be George Lucas to do it. Let's look at some stats. YouTube is the second largest search engine after Google. And of course, we know that Google owns YouTube. And YouTube plays over 1 billion hours of video every single day. So you can't understate the power of video. I mean, those of you who have kids and so on, you know you spend a lot of time in video. I look at a lot of how-to videos, when I'm doing home repairs and things like that. More than 50% of all YouTube video is consumed on mobile devices. So that's very consistent with the mobile device usage stat that Alan had showed earlier. And users like yourself every day share over 400 hours of new video. So it's a very viable and important channel that you need to integrate into your marketing process. And ultimately, YouTube has more viewers among the 18 to 49-year-olds than even any US cable network. So those are some key stats to remember, and it just maybe reinforce the power of video. So let's talk about maybe some ways you can start deploying video if you are not doing it already. Again, you don't need to be George Lucas. It doesn't have to be, Star Wars production, but you want to focus on delivering, fun, relevant, informational content in not more than 2-minute segments, for example. So, unless of course you are delivering a training segment or training manual. But even at that, breaking it down into consumable bites is important. Some video hacks maybe that you could, use and start playing with is, just keep it simple. All right. Informal is actually not a bad thing. Shoot with a GoPro or an iPhone or whatever. But these devices have plenty of quality that is certainly accepted in the marketplace. Use inexpensive, easy to use editing software. There's some tips here with Lumen 5 or Biteable. You can create very good short video without having to be an expert on video editing. And then, if you're in sales and you're trying to deliver a message to a prospect after a conversation or to restate something, you still might write that email, but now you might want to embed a message from you using an integrated app such as Vidyard, and it's a free app. Certainly there's paid versions of it as well, but go out there, you record a video, they see your face, it's part of the email you're sending, and they probably prefer to listen to you tell them what's written rather than spending the time writing it. So those are some tips that you might find useful. Let's look at content. That was another area in the need and research phase that is important. So delivering content to your audience is important about relevant and important topics to them. So you would want to promote this video throughout your website, and then of course through campaigns and other channels. You would want to set up on your website landing pages to capture the prospect's information. So looking at my screen, for example, you might see something there that's called Teaching Yourself Inbound Marketing. That's the third one over from the left on the top row. We get a fair amount of engagement on that, and somebody will click on download now. They'll be presented with a form and we'll capture their information. So that stranger has now become a real person, and you can continue to market to them. They haven't said they want to buy anything, but your content has converted them into a person that you can continue to communicate with. So high value content helps early in the buying process. This is where you can intercept the prospect while they're in their research phase. And at the end of the day, it promotes you as a trusted advisor. So let's quickly get into the middle phase. Here is where they're starting to think about design and evaluation of potential vendors, products, materials, and so on and so forth. And things that are relevant in this phase that people begin to look for are things such as CAD downloads, catalog engagement, being able to search parametrically against different parts and configurations, and calculators and so on. And then there's something called A/B testing in CRO, which is actually an activity and a tactic that you can use yourself. That's the one I'll touch upon. But being in the middle of the buyer journey, if they're a designer, they're going to want to do, to gather detailed information, such as calculators, application data, or if, me as an electrical engineer might be looking at motor sizing. So these are things that are important to somebody in that middle buying phase, in that design phase of the buying cycle. So make sure that information is available to them. Make sure those helpful calculators and tip sheets are there for them to make their job easier, because if you don't, someone else will. What I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about conversion rate optimization. And it seems like a jump from what we were talking about, but it actually isn't. So if you take a look at this particular screen, when you finally get a visitor to your site that meets your customer definition, one of the most frustrating things to see is you look at your analytics and you see that somebody from Boeing, who might be a great target customer for you, was on your site, and you're like, great, I got Boeing on my site, but who from Boeing? And that's probably one of the biggest frustrations for people, is they want the information of the person who was there and what they were looking at. So you want them to convert into a name and address, basically, at the end of the day. So this is where these forms come into play. When they get to the site, they found a piece of content, and you want them to submit the information you're looking for. Well, you can do A/B testing, or test different pages and different variations of a page to see which one engages the prospect more efficiently. So this is a real life example that the form on the left was tested against the form on the right. And the way it works is one visitor comes in, they're presented with one form, and another visitor may come in and they're presented with the new form. And you run this test over a period of time until the information is statistically relevant. And it turned out that the page with the form that was more front pulled to the kind of the front of the screen with color, 43% increase on submissions from the form on the left. So continued what's called conversion rate optimization testing is something that's very important in the middle of this buying cycle, because this is when people convert on your content and on your information. Some tips, some little things that you can use to help you with your things like A/B testing is you can use Google Optimize. It's free. Allows you to test variants of web pages and see how they perform against your objective that you specify. You can also use free versions of things like Hotjar and Lucky Orange to monitor user engagement on your website. So the top graphic shows, in the particular case, our website, and you'll see that obviously there's people spending most of their time on the menu. So obviously I was telling you, the user engagement, the menu needs to be compelling, relevant, and tell the story quickly where they need to go in the next step. So this is a very good tool. Again, you can tag some of them for free, test it out on your website. Like I said, there are paid variations of all these things, but you have the opportunity to test these out for free. You can load them and tag them to your website. It's an amazing thing once you start seeing what the actual users are doing and how they're engaging with your website. So at this point, we've kind of completed quickly the middle of the journey, and I'm going to toss it back to Alan to talk about the last two areas at the end of the journey.
Yeah, it's at this point in the process where vendor and supplier selection is going to take place. When we reach this part of the journey, this is when the phone's going to ring. This is when a contact us form, an RFQ form is being filled out. And of course, this is what we all want. This is the ultimate buying action. The engagements only happen after you satisfy all of the prior needs of that prospect throughout their journey, and they've put you on a short list of possible suppliers to compare. Now, this type of engagement will take place on or come from your website, or maybe an industry-specific platform such as thomasnet.com. And so, since this is so important, I do have a few housekeeping tips that I want to bring to your attention about your website. You definitely want to make sure that your website is secure. Most browsers that you would be using that you're familiar with, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, they give you some kind of an alert that lets you know that you are on a website that is not secure. Basically, if your website does not have an S after the HTTPS, that I know that's a rough way to look at it, but that's a good rule of thumb. If you don't have a secure website, it is going to be something very difficult for some of your buyers to get past, because, for instance, if you deal a lot with government or military, many of those people have directives stating they can't visit or interact with a non-secure website. So this is something that used to only be required for transactional websites if they were taking credit card information or a social security number. But now it's a requirement, as Google is frowning upon unsecure sites. And because of that, it can hurt your ranking. So this is something that you should contact your website provider if your site isn't secure. It's really not a difficult change, and they should be able to tell you what is required. Of course, it is just the right thing to do, especially in this day and age where security is paramount on everyone's mind when it comes to their digital presence. Another thing I want to bring to your attention is we talked earlier about the mobile use exceeding desktop use. So all users, but especially a mobile user, all users want an easy to use experience when they come to your website, and Google recognizes that. It's not just enough to be mobile friendly. It's important that the site is optimized for these different mobile devices. So just some things to remember. Your website needs to be mobile friendly since half of the traffic is coming from these devices. Google prioritizes mobile page load speed as a key metric when determining your website search ranking. 94% of organic search comes from Google, so this is something that you really need to make sure that you are addressing. And Google does offer some free online tools to help you evaluate how mobile friendly your website is and provides tips to help you optimize it. I want to bring to your attention, it's mentioned there on the slide, and as Bridget mentioned, you will get a copy of this, but it's something called the Google Page Speed Insights tool, and you can use that to help you in this area. So the journey has now ended. The sale is there, and so we now move on to the next portion of this, and I'll pass it back over to Mike.
Thanks, Alan. So the journey's ended, and historically, salesperson handed off the opportunity. It's been accepted by production, customer service, whoever's involved with the handoff, and the salesperson moved on to the next deal. But that journey has changed today. So it's important to keep in mind that it's a front to back and then returning to the front again type of situation. The buyer's journey starts at the beginning again, except now they're a customer and you want them to now become an advocate for your company, someone that you would get a lead from a referral. I mean, you ask any salesperson, what is the best lead that you can get? And we all know that a referral is your best lead. Unfortunately, it's oftentimes that this part of the sales journey or buyer experience is kind of ignored or is not treated as part of the sales cycle. So as this slide says, you want the sales experience not to end at the sale, and you want to remove every opportunity for friction from the overall buyer experience, from the sales process to the sales handoff to the fulfillment side of the delivery to the customer service post-sale. And all that information should be being collected in your tools that are part of your systems and your analytics that are measuring your website activity, your marketing automation, and looking at the sales engagement and how that customer got to you, the CRM through the sales process, and then your back office systems such as contracts and accounting. Your goal is to make the entire process as seamless as possible, because your new customer needs to be your next salesperson as well. So kind of being a geek, I want to talk about a flywheel and use a mechanical equivalency before I move into the next slide. But a flywheel is an energy storage device. Once it gets up to speed, it continues to output high levels of energy, and that's the goal of a flywheel. The output of the flywheel but is only limited by process losses and friction. Notice that term friction again. We want to remove as much friction from the process. When it's running well, the energy delivered does not have any ripples or spikes. It's smooth. It doesn't have any transients. But if something happens in a mechanical system or in the process, such maybe a bad bearing comes into play, the flywheel slows, the outputs begin to vary. So your process is starting to break down, and the experience for, in this particular case, energy delivery is poor. So keeping that analogy in mind, I'd like to kind of relate it to sales and marketing. Consider the flywheel model, all right? The whole life cycle journey. I talked about that on the first slide. But like a flywheel, if your sales and marketing process is well tuned, measured, and tracked, you can foresee upcoming business variations. Make adjustments, refine your processes to continually improve your sales and marketing efforts. Once you get the wheel spinning and reduce the friction in your system from sales to delivery, you will continue to get results as the process continues to refine. So the key, though, is all relies on data, your sales, marketing, and post-sales and service data, in order to continue to measure the customer experience and then refine the process. As HubSpot says, you want to use the momentum of a happy customer to drive referrals and repeat sales. So just basically keep your business delivering. So we're going to toss it off to Alan, and we have a little poll question here. So Alan, it's all yours.
Yeah, so with that in mind, where are you struggling the most? There's lots of parts during the journey and with the flywheel especially. So where are you struggling most? Is it attracting your prospects? Is it converting those prospects into customers? Or is it retaining customers? They all have different challenges and different needs. And so in the chat pane, I invite you to react to that and provide any feedback you have either in the chat or the QA function. Just want to know where in that process, in that buyer's journey, are you struggling the most?
Okay, so we're covering a great deal very quickly. There's a lot of information that's being delivered, but I'd like to talk about potentially what's next for an organization. So you've talked about the buyer's journey, you've talked about some tips and hacks, you've talked about what's important to the prospect and buyer and how to maybe convert them into a human being from a stranger and so on and so forth. But we also talked about the life cycle. So we would like to talk about potentially what's next and things you should consider in your business. So what does it mean for your company? The important thing is to be very deliberate and systematic in your approach, and do not expect results overnight if you haven't fully engaged in this whole buyer's journey or the sales life cycle. It's not something that happens overnight. But it takes time and it's worth it, because once it's rolling, it then continues to deliver energy or deliver results that you're looking for as a company. So we go through a process ourselves where we take a 3-step journey with our clients. And that first step is to look at closely and hard at people, process, and technology that you have in place. Documenting exactly what's going on today or not, what's going on but like to go on. Show you areas for improvement, so identify those and put those down and document those. And by doing this process, and it's going to be interdepartmental and working together, especially when it comes to sales and marketing and customer service, it enables you to find and close your gaps in your process. So you want to identify the areas that you'd like for improvement. This probably is the toughest phase, because it's the phase that you got to be most critical about yourself. All right. Invariably, there's issues with roles and responsibility, and they're fuzzy, and you're not sure who's doing what, and you want to make sure those are clear. All right. Your teams speak different languages. Marketing sometimes speaks differently than sales, and sales differently than customer service. So communication using the same language is important. All working off the same sheet of accountability. And what I mean by that is the metrics by which your company and your individual departments measure success, and they shouldn't be in silos. If processes aren't documented, you should be asking yourself questions like, why is it taking so long to close deals? Or why are some of our prospects not followed up with? Why are they slipping through the cracks? Why are we chasing information if it's already available, and why aren't we using the tools? How are we using the tools? Are they optimized for our business? These are the type of questions you need to look at this phase, and again, document them and set a plan in place for implementation. And this is what we call the align phase. So this assessment phase, which could take months, might have revealed that your teams may not be as productive as they could be, might not be working together potentially. Aligned, an interesting stat is aligned sales and marketing teams have a 38% higher sales win rate. That's a stat from Marketing Props. So, when you see evidence that sales and marketing aren't necessarily working in tandem, it's your cue to open up lines of communication and clarify those roles and responsibilities. So you want to focus on aligning your people and teams by clarifying those roles in a departmental communication and consistent language. Example, what's a lead? Marketing might define a lead as one thing. Sales says, I want a lead further down in the funnel. And right there's a disconnect. So just the same language is important. Making sure the processes and procedures are identified for lead handling, lead pass-off, measurements that you are using to benchmark your success. And then, of course, the tools all need to be reporting back on that. And the data that you're using to report back on that obviously needs to be available to the systems to do so. So you have to look hard at your data as well. The key is in this phase is deploying and testing and starting to run with the new processes and procedures and technologies that you have identified in the assess phase, and start to deploy them during this phase. And then ultimately refine. Now, obviously, the world of sales and marketing is always changing. That's why this phase is ongoing forever. We'll never get it perfect, but in the manufacturing space, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So if you have the data and you're actually taking stock in the data and measuring the activity and measuring the results and looking at the way people are interacting with their technology and identifying areas that are still not right and still have gaps. It's this part of the phase that you use to tweak and continue to refine. So the key is setting up a center of excellence for your company. And it's, again, multi-departmental, all right? And, you know, you're looking at your processes and procedures, you're looking at your technology, you're looking at the people, and are they using the tools the way you want them to use, and are they following the processes, or is more training required, and so on and so forth. And that center of excellence prioritizes and deploys the adjustments based upon priority and its agreed upon priorities. So the key is to keep that interdepartmental communication open throughout the entire process. So that is the three-step approach. That would be at a very high level, some of the things that you want to look at through the assessment phase, then of course the deployment phase, and then finally the ongoing refinement phase. So we've kind of come to the end of all the data and all the information that we had to share. So just a quick shameless plug for Acadia is I just wanted to share this image with you. We find it very compelling because the guide runner works side by side with their client, the blind runner in this case, the para-athlete, and our goal is to work side by side with companies and help them to the finish line. We're willing to do the work alongside you, and our primary focus at the end of the day is help you drive demand and help us help you drive demand in lead generation programs on your behalf. So we are also a HubSpot Gold partner and a certified Thomas partner, which gives us the access to the power of their platforms. So as a natural course of doing business, we've over the years have begun working with clients through this whole assess, align, and refine stages as well. So just remember, sales and marketing is an ongoing journey, and it's process and data driven, and Katie's here to help you if it's something that you're in need of. I'd like to thank everybody for your time, and I would, I guess, pass it off to Bridget and any questions that might be out there, or share any of the feedback that people put in the panels regarding the website, what they're thinking of today, given the situation, and so on.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we've had some good feedback. You know, looks like some people are struggling to have the website generate leads for them. Others are having success there. So not uncommon to see that issue. One comment that I wanted to bring up that was pretty interesting before we hop into questions. Someone submitted, our biggest challenge is targeting our specific demographic. We have a specific niche, sales managers of distribution companies, that has a very narrow Google Analytics. So just thought that was pretty interesting. Mike, Alan, I don't know if you guys have any comments on that feedback.
Yeah, one of the key areas is a title is important. Obviously, you know who that is. But the key is what problems are they trying to solve, and identifying those traits and needs and challenges of the persona and documenting them. I went through a process with a client, and his case was procurement professionals in the commodity metal spaces, so commodity stamped metals in their particular case. And we identified all the needs that they'd run into, all the problems that they had to overcome, and the questions that they ask of the salesperson during the sales process, and the internal problems that they need to overcome within their own organizations, and that being the procurement agents dealing with the engineers, getting specs from them, and so on and so forth. So that was one area, and we defined all those needs and all those communication challenges and so on that procurement people typically have a challenge with in those space, and it created all kinds of content opportunities that presented the opportunity for our client to write content that people are looking for, the questions that they are asking. The other person that they're interested in is design engineer. For them, that's important because they can get early into the design phase. And so we had to create a whole series of topics assigned to the design engineer, but the same process was taken, is defining what challenges they had what type of questions they were asking, things they had to solve internally, things they had to solve from materials and those types of technical perspectives. And that created a whole litany of content topics that they began to leverage. Just by going through that process, you are able to then provide the information on your website, leverage the content in such a way that you now become your domain becomes authoritative, your website becomes authoritative, and it begins to gain SEO value, which in turn drives leads. So long answer to a short question, but those are some things that I would consider starting with.
Great, thanks. Another question we had, have Alan or Mike, either of you, seen any statistics yet on how much future industrial buying will never involve a face-to-face meeting, but will be fully digitally based after all this is over? Have you seen any stats on what the impact will be?
Well, go ahead, Alan.
I say no stats, but just anecdotally, we've heard from people that have just mentioned to us that now that they're into, Zoom has gone from, a 20 million user base to like a 300 million, 300 million user base. This adoption was forced upon us, and now people who have been hesitant in the past to do a Zoom meeting, or they joined a Zoom meeting but they didn't turn their cameras on, now it's almost becoming something that you have to do nowadays. And I think people are realizing, wow, I don't need to take that 2-hour drive to go speak with that prospect. People have adopted and adapted to this technology. That hurdle has been crossed for us. It might have been odd if you said, well, I'm not going to visit you, Mr. or Miss Business Person. I'm just going to do a video conference. They might have thought that you were trying to, not value them. But now it's going to be, I think, something that is any stigma that might have been attached to it has been overcome. Mike, any other additional thoughts?
Oh, I completely agree, Alan. And you may want to also, again, here's a great example. You may have gone through an assess and a line and a refine in your own companies. It might have been your own different phases, but looking at all the same things that we discussed. But guess what? Your selling process has now changed. So you've got to change your systems because now if you're relying on face-to-face meetings, that might not be quite as relevant as they were just 3 months ago. So you might want to consider that your early phases, your discovery phase, your pre-qualification phase is done this way, done digitally, obviously with the video conference. I'm actually finding personally that is working very well. And what's that's allowing me to do is have 5, 6, 7 conversations in a day with different people in different companies that are early in the process.
That you never could have done before.
I could never have gone door to door that way. And so what that's allowing me to do is use that process to vet early in, still have that almost personal contact that eye contact, but you can establish that relationship fairly quickly digitally. So it's going to change your process. But to Alan's point, I've not seen any numbers. I'd be interested to see over time. I'm sure there's going to be many market studies after this, but it's definitely changing.
Great, thanks so much. We are getting right up against our hour here. So if there were any other questions that we have submitted here, we will follow up with you on those right after this. And you'll get the slides here momentarily after the webinar. So look out for that. One other thing we wanted to mention while we have you all, if you found this webinar beneficial, we are having another webinar on May 19th, and it will be talking about what to do if you had trade shows on your schedule and they've been canceled now. How do you get some of that potential sales exposure back? So we'll send out a registration link for that in the follow-up email as well if you think that would be beneficial for you. So with that, we'd like to thank you for your time today. And if there's anything else, feel free to reach out to Mike or Alan. Their contact information's up on the screen. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.